Hey there, School of Tomorrow students. In your personal workspace, spaces, whatever bubbles around you, say a radius of a couple meters, we could call that your personal workspace. I mean, it includes your main tool, which is your bionics, right? You've got your cyborg, your piece, your avatar, and then what else, right? And lots of times it's a computer, a dashboard, an API, something in a truck, in a car, in a plane. We have similar concepts about motion, velocity, regardless of where we are, orientation. You can tell that fighter pilot guy that's made a difference, right? John Boyd. Previous video. Been floating around and joining in various meetups. I've kind of finished my work, you could say, but there's always more. So the main thing is this essay, which echoes something of a few years ago, but it's pithier, shorter, has better pictures. In other words, I think my game continues to improve, and that's why it's still worth pumping out another video because it gets a little better every time. When I sense that the quality is really dropped off, then it's time to say, hey, there's a body of work, right? Don't dilute it with, I can't find my hat. So, it's a philosophical investigation in the sense that in the Wittgenstein philosophy, we're encouraged to not just flash on something and say, oh, I know what that means. Especially individual words, especially words having to do with psychological things like understanding or thinking, right? To think you know what that means just in a flash, like you glanced at something, like an object or a process. This is the beginning of a fallacy or a misleading way of life, inauthentic in Wittgenstein's view. So we actually have to check and investigate and look into. We have to audit with a fresh mind what a word means, and to do that we have to investigate its use. Now this may sound like postmodernist deconstructionism to you, but I assure you, I squeaked through Princeton before that stuff really hit, I guess. But I wasn't like against reading like Euro philosophers like Habermas and stuff. I had Rorty as my professor, and he was into like Derrida and all that. But I never took a course from Rorty called something like Continental Philosophy from Sartre Forward or something. That was not a course I took. I was really into Wittgenstein all that time, and that was a long time ago, right? So what I do in this essay, I just want to be clear, is go through what you could call the flat case and then the volumetric case for using a 60-degree apparatus with logical consistency, internal logical consistency. So the goal here in philosophy of mathematics, which we share with children, is because we think currently that's what we're doing, like infinitely flat planes that are infinitely extended in space. You've never experienced that, right? You can imagine something fun. But where did that come from? It came from Greek metaphysics. So we say it's mathematics. We should, I think, just call it all metaphysics, and maybe there's a small part we could call mathematics, like chess. Just kidding. I know we're not going to change, but metaphysics is what we teach them in elementary school. So I'm not going to say that in my doing that, I'm somehow branching away in a radical manner. Not in that respect. The respect in which my curriculum here is a bit radical is it introduces a logically consistent alternate paradigm that is accessible to people unschooled in mathematics. They don't have to appreciate deviations around the fifth postulate, Euclid's, or something like, hypergeometric tesseracts, multidimensional, that kind of high stuff that you already need a lot of school to get. Here, we're like just on a sandy beach. We're kind of like having a happy life. We're not a mathematical culture. And yet, we have this whole way with our sails and our nets of doing something called multiplication, an operation that relies on a 60-degree rather than a 90-degree paradigm. And it's got enough consistency and it hangs together well enough that it's disturbing to the, now I'm going to say earthlings, but in this story, the normals. The normals don't want, expect, or have any real patience for competition around something like this. They're very lip servicey about how, oh yeah, there's many ways to begin a mathematics, and they talk about ethnomathematics, and there's the pretense of open-mindedness. But when you get to something as simple as what the trims do here, then you get a resounding silence because it's a little bit too close to home. It's like, no, no, we didn't want to question that. That's very inconvenient. Now, I'm not saying there's any move to take away anything here. In other words, the mental toys that you already have and that you love, I didn't say loathe, that you love, keep them all. Calculus on down, right? Infinitesimals, infinite Euclid, everything. There's no reason to discard anything just because someone else does another sandcastle somewhere else on the beach. Doesn't mean kick yours down. No one asked you to. No one said this is an invitation to nihilism. This is just a fun civilizational development where we're rehabilitating Bucky Fuller's philosophy. And why do we do that? Why do we care? Well, because we still have some hope for the industry missed. In other words, taking our higher tech, our airplane tech, our maritime tech, our aerospace tech, where we've done the most with the least, where we used metals, and they are expensive metals, but they are very recycled. Aluminum, I'm talking about especially. I haven't gone into architecture myself. I'm not a house engineer or dwelling unit machine engineer, okay? I don't work for Boeing, but that would be the type of person, right? Someone works for an aerospace company in the business of, oh, there's a funny picture on that. I wonder if I'll find it. In the business of doing dwellings. I'm going to jump to Facebook profile here and ridicule the very concept I just offered. Anyway, if you're all into American transcendentalism, if you know American history even a tiny little bit, then you are very aware of this whole movement in literature and culture around the 80s, 90s. Before that, let's see, I have John Denver's album as proof. Right, you don't know your history if you don't know in some detail the Bucky Fuller vision for aerospace meets everyday housing meets, right? And it's core to American literature at this point. You don't teach it. I understand you're in a foreign country, maybe. That makes sense. Okay, so now switching gears a little bit. So that essay was important. It's short, and it ends up with the S module, which of all the modules I could have picked, this is direct from Synergetics, I think is a very promising one because it goes to some of the best David Kosky research right away. I should put a link there actually to another NB Viewer experience. Now, speaking of NB Viewer, how do I teach like teenagers and above? First of all, when I'm teaching the actual teenagers, like it's me teaching direct to students, it's Python that I'm usually going through, the computer language, and it's not heavy-handed on doing a lot with geometry. But I do, as you see here, have the primitive volumes if we want them. Actually, do I even talk about volumes here? All I see are faces, vertices, and edges here. So yeah, I'm not too deep into, well, I'm talking about tetrahedron, octahedron. So I'm not harping on synergetics when I teach Python necessarily, but when I'm talking to teachers who are going to work in, let's call it my school, then I want more like a polymath curriculum. And therefore, we do have to jump into what I was just showing you, the philosophy of mathematics a little bit, not just even just a little bit. Now, here's the same homepage viewed through NB Viewer, and that's a public website that lets you pull something out of GitHub. And my technique with the kids is we all dig a hole on our own computer to clone a repo, told them what that meant, showed them how to do that. And then on the side, if you're up for it, like depend on your age, your interest, how much you're going to go into this, create your own GitHub account and, start putting your own Jupyter notebooks up there. That's what I'd call homework, right? And we've had some kids doing that. We've had other kids, maybe they do it and they don't even tell me. As the teacher, I'm not standing over them with some kind of whip and chain saying, do this, do this. I'm saying, here's a range of activities. And if you plan on getting good at this stuff and you want to get noticed for like, oh, wow, this person's doing Jupyter notebooks and they're only 15 years old and they're doing all this stuff. If you want that kind of admiration, it's like with sports, right? You got to practice, right? Skateboard, whatever. So as a teacher, as a coach, I don't have to like whip people through their homework. I'm just like, to the extent you want to be good at this stuff, put in some time, right? And they understand all that. And the same thing with teachers. But with teachers, like I say, I won't just do Python with a touch of geometry. I'll dive into the philosophy of mathematics a little more deeply and talk about paradigms and, are we looking at axioms at the bottom or is there no bottom, right? What is a form of life? We'll talk like a Wittgenstein pattern because that's what I've, gotten good at. So you go to a different teacher, you get something else. So going back in history now, here we are looking at one of my older YouTubes. I just wanted to wind up here. I make my education place-based. So I'm in Portland, Oregon, and over the summer we had all this like stuff going on downtown, and I was not in the crowd, but I was giving my 2 cents, right? Suggesting more of a soundstage kind of Woodstock atmosphere with really an organized program and live music and all that, instead of what people seem to. There were 2 shows going on this summer. There was the kind of the intellectual highbrow, let's all talk policy and how should we recast the police and what's the role playing that's really going on. And those kind of people could also think at home. So they weren't necessarily as prone to go downtown given the pandemic and so on. And then we have people who really, they just want to get a sense of their world by finding enough like-minded, in other words, a mob that feels like them and wants to storm around, like happened in the Capitol on January 6th. People who want and need to be a part of a big group and storm around. That's kind of what the military is. I wouldn't call that work necessarily. Like even if you're paid to do it as a provocateur, I don't see it. I see great hope for mankind in, and I'll close with this remark, how much we support people who don't work. And by that, I'd zoom into the Pentagon and just show that giant parking lot. And most of DC, it's like it's generating a lot of thoughts and paper and stuff for the shredding machine. But in terms of work, moving people around, so many people just floating around on battleships ready to start the big war, right? And making the weapons to do that. Now, I would work in a Protestant sense, and I've got some writings on this, has to be along the lines of intention. In other words, when you learn the physics, if you pull on a vector that's completely orthogonal to getting any work done, it doesn't count as work, even if you stress and strain a lot. So what I see is a lot of stress and straining, a lot. But as for work, I see a lot of self-righteous Protestants thinking they work, preferring to say that they do, but I don't agree. I think they're not working. I think they're goofing off. But I don't think this is goofing off. This is useful. So this is work. Talk to you later.